Hey, what's up, Shikataganai? Back again. It's been a while since I did some videos, so we are back again creating some videos. I had some different things going on in my career, so I didn't have time to make a lot of different videos. But I am back again. We're going to be resuming some of the video series, like pop, another server drop. And this one today, we're going to be doing this for Intel Bytes. And Intel Bytes category for what I do is going to be based on information about things like threat intel, OSINT, dark web, ransomware, breach data, that sort of thing. And so today's topic is going to be on ransomware and ransomware feeds and blogs. For those not familiar, the ransomware groups out there typically will publish a blog, and on that blog they'll list all the victims that they've pwned or are in the process of pwning. And sometimes they'll have the data leaked on that blog site, or if they still are waiting for payment, they'll have like a countdown timer like Lockbit does, and they'll show the vendor and such. And so it's important to understand that from a company standpoint or from a threat intelligence position, that you want to be aware of these things, especially if you use a lot of third-party vendors. Because even though vendors are supposed to report this stuff whenever they get breached or they get a ransom or whatever, sometimes that doesn't happen, and sometimes it doesn't happen very timely. So it's always good to do some due diligence and just always be monitoring for when you're, all your different vendors and yourself included as a company, to see if you're in any of these ransomware blogs that somebody has ransomed you or ransomed one of your vendors, because you want to be aware what kind of data is being stolen and being leaked. Is it just company data about that vendor, or is it about the customers? Because then it's more of a concern for you. Now you have to bring in legal and all these other different things for PII. So it's really important to be able to go ahead and get a handle on this and be monitoring it. However, sitting there and parsing through and reading through all of these fields and then comparing it with a list you have over here on your left hand with all your vendors, that's a bit problematic, which is where we can get into scripting. Now, myself, I'm not a Python scripter by any means. I understand the code, but I don't sit around programming for my daily activities. I do threat intelligence stuff for my daily activities, but I can read the code and I can understand it, and it's useful for me in the vein of doing threat intel. And whenever you use tools that somebody else made, as far as like in code or whatever, it's always useful for you to look through it and see how it actually works and understand how you can actually enhance it if need be. So it's always a good idea to know a little bit about the scripting language, and typically what you'll see a lot of is you'll see a lot of tools for hacking and for threat intel being made in Python, because Python's fairly easy to learn out of most scripting languages, and it's also very small amount of code can do a whole lot. Something that may take 20 lines in another language may take only 5 lines in Python. It is interpreted and not compiled, so it's not as fast as some of the compiled languages, but for our purposes, for what we're doing today, that's not a big issue for us. So we're going to be using Python here. A big shout out to the curated Intel Discord, Bushido Tokens Discord. Excellent threat intel Discord, but not just threat intel. They have a lot of other things on there they talk about and advisories and such. But some of the people on that group helped me craft this particular script here to be able to do this for my job. It's really cool. You can just jump into this Discord channel, kind of ask for help, say, hey, listen, this is what I kind of need for my threat intel, and a lot of guys will jump in and they're very responsive. So big shout out to Curated Intel for that. I can't remember the names of the people that did this, helped me out with this, so I apologize, but all the people over there, Curated Intel, you guys rock. So in this particular one, we're going to be dealing with here is a Ransomwatch script, and we're going to do it in Python. So the goal is to have a vendor list, such as what you may have listed for vendors. We'll make our own vendor list. Let's do that real quick, actually. So let me just bring up some LeafPad action here, and I will, let's see. I don't know, just Pepsi sounds good. Spectrum, Apple, Wingnut, and let's do one that I know for sure is in there. We'll just take the first one I find. Again, I'm not trying to call anybody out. I'm just picking I'm really just picking the first entry I see here, so that we know what's actually in there. We want to see what a true answer would be. So I'll just put that in there as well. And I will call this vendor-list.txt. And we will keep it in our Ransomwatch folder. Excellent. All right, so the end goal of what we want before we get into the script is to come over to the script, and we're going to change this, and we're going to call it, what did we just call it? I'm horrible at remembering things. Vendor-list. So we're going to call it vendor-list. Oops, we'll go back to it again. So vendor-list, and again, I'll talk about what all these lines are here, but I'm just going to go ahead and show you what we're expecting out of this, what the output should be. So we'll go ahead and click save, and we'll come over here, and we're in our Ransomwatch directory here. So what we're going to do is go Python 3, and we're going to do our ransomwatch.py, and the expected output is as you see here. Now Wingnut is not one of them, so obviously that's not in the list, but we do see this one. We do see this one, and we do see this one. So this is the expected output that we want. And we'll talk about how we double check these just a little bit later on, okay? So that is the expected output of what we're going to be doing today. All right, let's go back to the script now. Now I've also made a notes that I'm going to put into the description of the video. So you guys will have all of this stuff at your disposal. You'll have the script, and you also have these notes here. So we're going to kind of play off of these notes. I'll walk through some of these notes with you guys in this video so that you guys can see kind of what you can follow along with the notes. So let's talk about the very beginning of the script. So we can see at the very beginning of the script that we have this shebang, as it were, and then this user/bin/env Python 3. So that particular one here, as you'll note from my notes here, if you have multiple different versions of Python installed, like you have your Python 2, your Python 3, if you do have those different versions installed and you want to be very specific about what the interpreter is, this user/bin-env is basically ensuring that the interpreter used is the first one that you would have in an environment variable that you can view by doing the path variable on that. In this particular case, you could also hard code it specifically to wherever your Python interpreter is on the distro you're using. In my case, I'm using Kali Linux for this, so it may be in, I think it's in user bin Python. I believe that's where it's at. But in this particular case, it's just a common way to do the beginning of a script. It doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this is one way that it's kind of a catch-all for me, if you will, to do it. So we're going to start off with that. The next thing we see in the script is import JSON and import requests. So whenever you're doing scripting, so that you don't have to recreate the wheel, a lot of times these developers will reuse code that somebody else has already made. I mean, why recreate the wheel? For instance, if I'm going to be parsing this web feed right here, I need to go ahead and have Python code already made that deals with HTTP requests. Well, I could make my own. I could just go ahead and just code it directly in the script itself, or somebody else has already done that for me ahead of time, so why don't I just pull in their script and then just call some of the stuff from there, right? So in this particular case, that's what we're doing with this import request. That's a library that we can actually bring into the script, and now that we've imported it, we can call anything from it, any of the functions that are inside of that script. Then the JSON one is just so that we can parse through the data that we're receiving, because in this particular case, the data we're receiving is in JSON format. So if you go look over here on the Python documentation, we're going to reference some of this documentation because it's always good to go and know kind of what you're doing when you're looking through these particular scripts. You can see there's a variety of different Python tutorials regarding JSON, and you can always see that they start off by importing that particular module. In this particular case here, then they can use like this one here, json.loads. Okay, so that would be an example of a method or a dot syntax, they may call it here, that you would be able to use now because you've imported JSON. If you didn't import this and you said this, the script will say, well, what are you talking about? I don't know what this JSON.loads is. Well, because you imported that, that's why you can do it. So we're going to be using that, and you can see here, this is the actual JSON library from Python, and this is where you can see all the documentation for using this particular one. Okay, so we're importing those into our script so that we can use them. All right, next we have a with open vendor list. Let's go back to my notes here, and you'll see here on step number 4 is what we're talking about. So later in the code, we're going to use something called a try catch, and try catch is more like, hey, try this, and if it doesn't work, I don't want the whole app to blow up. I want to go ahead and do what they call an accept and actually print out an error, keep the app running, but just print out an error and let me know, hey, this part here is not working right or as intended. So that's what they call a try catch. And typically when you try to open a file, which is what we're going to do here in Python, you want to be able to open that, close it, open it, read it, close it. So you have to think about all the different things that are going to have to happen in your script. So when you have a file in the directory you're in, which in our case is vendor-list.txt, I want to open that. I don't want to write to it. I just want to read from it. So I want to open up in read mode. But then after I'm done getting all the content and data from it, I want to close it. Now I can do that with a try statement, essentially, like this one right here. Right. So if I say f equals open, I'm basically saying or assigning a variable called f to be the content that it finds here. In this particular case, it's saying do an open for this file and do it in write mode. Now there are other modes for this file open stuff like read, append, write, those sort of things, create. In this case, it's doing a write, and then it's saying f write hello world, but then at the end, notice it has to do an f close as well. Well, what if you're lazy or you're just absent-minded that day and you forget to do an f-close or f.close? Then it's going to be causing errors and problems because you're not actually doing your cleanup, as it were. So what's cool about with is it would actually it does that for you automatically with the with part. So for this case here, we're saying with open, we're saying to open up the file, in this case, vendors or vendor-list.txt as f. So we're saying whatever the content you pull from opening this in read-only mode, do it as f. Now you're probably thinking, well, there's no R, there's no W, what are you talking about? If you don't specify this value right there, the W or the R or the A or the C, if you don't specify that, by default it's in read mode. Okay, so in this case, we're not specifying it, it is in read mode. So this case here, it makes that value as f. Then we do another variable that we're going to call brands, which would be our vendors. You can call it anything you want. That doesn't have to be that. It can be anything. And then we're saying, and by the way, this f doesn't have to be f either. It can be, wingnut, whatever you want, but keep it, relating to what it does. In this case, f being file. That's why we did it this way. So in this one here, we see because it's stored the data that's coming from this vendors.txt in f. So we're now doing what they call a dot syntax or a method, and we're saying, okay, I want to read what's in there, but then I also want to do a split line. So I kind of listed out here, A, B, C, and D, what it's doing. So first, we're using the with command so that it can handle the file closing automatically, and I don't have to do an f.close or anything at the end of it, which is pretty efficient for me. Next, it says the file we want to open is called vendors.txt, in our case, vendorlist.txt. If it doesn't exist, create it. And if we don't specify R, W, A, or C, then do the default, in this case being read for that. Now, it's probably good practice to specify it, but in this case, I didn't. So it defaults to read, and we want to open it as the variable f. So then next, we make the variable brands, and that's going to store whatever the value is that you're doing for f.read split lines. It's stored in the value or the variable called brands. And the split lines is just a method within the string library for Python. And the idea of it is to split the string into a list where each list is its own list item. So if I had 50 vendors in my text document, in my case, what do we have, like four or five? If I had like 50 of them, and let's say they were all on one line, I want to be able to split the lines if need be into different into their own values, as it were. So we looked at our vendor list, for example, right here. I want each of these to be their own value. I don't want the script to look up Pepsi Spectrum Apple Wingnut Windmuller as one value. I want it to look up Pepsi, because we're going to do what's called a for loop. I want it to look up Pepsi. And then the next time it loops, I want it to look up Spectrum. And then the next time it loops, I want to look at Apple, right? So that's why we're doing this little split line deal here to do that, okay? I have an example here where I say text, thank you for the music, and then I did a slash to the left N, and welcome to the jungle. And then here you can see I made a variable called X, and I said the variable text, which is this value here, dot split lines, print X. What it would output is make it into their own, field, their own values. So in this case, this is one, and then this is one because of that split line in this particular case. Now in my case, I didn't do a slash n because I don't have them all on one line. I've actually put them on each on one line. So I'm basically telling it, if it wasn't that way, to do a split lines in this case here, okay? All right, next, let's go take a look at what we got going on next. All right, so with open, okay, feed URL. Again, I'm just making a variable name. You can call it anything you want. I'm calling it feed URL, and then in this case here, I'm giving it the value of that web page that has all of that JSON data. That's all that one's doing. All right, next we got try and we got accept. This is very common in Python, and it's a way to handle errors. Because if you were to try in some code and it caused some problems, like you forgot something or you didn't declare the value of a particular variable or something like that, it probably will cause the app to just crash and close, and that would make everybody mad that's using the app, and they won't use your app again because it's really buggy. So if you want to continue running the app, if something is not damaging enough problem where it will actually cause the app to do some serious damage, and it's just a common error of some sort that you can kind of skip past but be alerted of it, that's where this comes in pretty handy, because then you can use what they call an accept clause, and it can actually have an exception print out something that you want. So you can specify what it will say when it comes back. So you can be very verbose about what it does. So this whole block here is what they call a try except block. All right. So let's go take a look at it here in our notes. So we have this try. Let's take a look at the first one. Now, by the way, the syntax in Python is very specific about this. What's awesome about Python is you don't have to put semicolons at the end of everything. However, it does have some nuances, such as spacing. In this particular case, when you're doing an if clause or you're doing a try except, the syntax would be try colon, hit enter, and then you'll hit tab because you need 4 spaces, or else it will give you a syntax error. So that's why it looks the way it does here. We're doing a try colon, and then the next line is 4 spaces. So the first thing we have is we're declaring a variable called ransom_post, and it's going to equal request.getFeedURL.json. So that's a lot of stuff there. So let's go take a look at the request library in this case here. If we look at the request documentation, and all of these links, by the way, will be in the same document I'm going to post. So here you can see we've imported request in this example. They've given the name R as a variable, and it's saying request.get this particular page. Now, what they've done is they've put this into two separate lines. I've done it all in one line in my case. But regardless, you can see here it's specifying JSON. So in this case, the JSON decoding part is what we're trying to call for this. Okay, that's the reasoning for using that .json at the end. And in this case, the request is referencing this, and the .get is a method that's within this library that we've imported. Now, if I didn't import this library, I would have to code how it does a HTTP GET. And GET would refer to the HTTP method, things like post, get, put, right? Those sort of things. I'm getting the content from a web page is basically what we're doing here. Take a look at the syntax too. It's in parentheses and it has single quotes around it. So that's important to note. All right, let's go back here. So in this particular case, we're doing feed URL, which is this, right? So it's basically insert this right here, .json. So we're basically saying parse it or encode it or decode it, if you will, as JSON in this case. Next, though, there is a for loop. For loop is basically what they call an iteration. So it's saying, hey, whatever we actually have in our list, like for me, I had 4 or 5 different vendors in the list, and then the web page also has multiple different lines as well. I'm saying go through each one and run one from my vendor list and one to compare the list from the feed thing. And then after that's done, loop back and go to the next vendor in the list and run the checks against the ransom feed. When that's done, come back, we'll loop and run the next one, and so on and so forth. So it's doing an iteration down through each one of the ones I have in my vendor list that I have. And you know it's doing that because it's referencing that vendor list brands. If you recall, up here, I'll just go back to this. If you recall that we actually put the vendor list in this variable called brands. Now, what gets confusing for some people is this brand here. This can be any word. It can be wingnut, it can be whatever. Doofus, it doesn't really matter. But you want to kind of keep it similar to what you're dealing with. But you don't really necessarily want to either name it the same as the variable either, because then it really gets confusing. So in this case, I'm just saying store the information in each iteration or loop in this value or variable, if you will, called, or holder, we'll just call it a holder, called brand. And when it does that, it allows me then to use some dot syntax or method usage. And that method usage would be something like dot lower. Now in this particular case here, it's saying take everything that's in my vendor list. For example, if we look here, we can see everything here is in lowercase except for Windmuller. Okay, so it's basically saying, let me move back here. It's basically saying with that particular one, let's see if I can find it here. One of these here. Well, maybe I don't actually have it open. Oh, there it is, string lower. So it's basically saying this: if I had some text that I was feeding it, and it had some capitalization like this right here, I'm saying take that value of whatever that you see there, but make them all lowercase. So you can see here, if we were to try this, you can see right here, it took friends, that was all capitalized, and it turned it into lowercase friends, okay? So that's what that lower thing does, okay? Let's go back here. All right, so we're seeing that it says if brand. Now this is the start of what they call a nested, these are what they call nested commands, where we have our for, and then we have this for here, which is saying now iterate through every single one in the brands. Well, let's go back up here first. So we're saying for post in ransom post, and ransom post, if you recall, is whatever is in this page here. So we're saying grab everything from that web page that has all the different vendors and ransomware posts, store that value per loop iteration in this value here called post. We'll call it, again, we'll call it a holder so that we won't confuse you with the variables, but it's essentially what it is. So we're saying for post in ransom post, which is referencing this, and then it's saying for brand in brand. So now it's doing 2 for loops where the brand in brands is the vendor list that we made. So it's saying go down through each one of those per loop it does, and also go through each one of those in the URL as well and store it in a value called post. So then we go through and we do our comparison check, if you will, or the if-else, what they would call it. We're saying basically, and this isn't always the case, but in most cases, the value we're looking for with an if statement is if something is true, do something. If not, do something else. In this particular case, we're just using the if part because we have an except that we're going to put in here. So we're just saying if the brand.lower, so we're saying if the name from the vendor list that we've now lowercased in post title lower. So this part right here, post title, is if you go back to the Ransomwatch feed page, you'll notice that one of the fields here is post title. You'll notice another field here is group name, and another field is discovered. We're saying go through this feed, but the only thing I'm worried about, the only thing I want currently is just whatever the value is in this field. So you see that post, you see that one. So it's doing this as an iteration. It's going through all of these, and it's just pulling this value. And it's saying, take that value and compare it to any of these names here. And if you get a hit, do something. That's kind of what we're trying to attain with this if statement, okay? So let's come back over here. So we're saying if brand lower, in post title dot lower. Again, it's taken the value that's in post title and it's lowering it, so it does a one-to-one matching, if you will. Then print. So in other words, if this statement right here is true, in other words, if we do find a match between what's in the ransom feed and what's in our vendor list, then print F, and F, by the way, is just a format. Oops, I get confused with all the different ones I have here. F is just a way, a formatting, if you will, string formatting for Python. So I put a link there so you can kind of learn more about it. So if you're wondering what that's all about. So we're saying, if this is true, print out this, exclamation point, found a match for, and then brand. And it's basically saying whatever we had stored, whatever value was matched from brand, in other words, whatever value from vendor list, let's pretend this one, if that was actually something that was true and we stored it, that's what it's going to insert here, which is what you see with these little squiggly lines around it. We're saying insert whatever value was matched, stored here. And then we're saying by, and then the next thing it's saying post group name. So now we're actually pulling something else out of that ransom feed, and we want to know the group who pwned whatever that target was. So now we're saying give us this value. So printf found a match for whatever the value of the vendor is by post group name, and then discovered at, and then post discovered. In other words, when was it discovered? And that is also this field here and this. So when we ran our code the first time, we do know that Windmuller was in this list. It was a match, and we wanted it to print this and the group that pwned them here, and then the discovered list here. So if we go back and look, that's exactly how it looks. Found a match for Windmuller, because it took that and stuffed it in there, because that's one of the matched, by Lorenz. Now we could actually do better formatting here and add a little space after the by, but I'm not worried about that. Discovered at, and then it inserted that value here. Works exactly as we intended. That's what it's saying to do if this were true. If it wasn't true, then go ahead and run the for loop again and start it all over again and go down through the list and check and see until we get another match. That's what it's doing with this whole iteration or for loop, if you will. Okay? So now that that is all done, let's say there was any kind of error, whatsoever. Like if I mistyped something or put a wrong value or didn't declare something, then I want to go to what they call an except. So in this particular case, let's say we had this code here, try print x except print an exception has occurred. In this case, this bunch of code will cause an error because I never declared x prior to it. It's just, I threw it out there, x. It's going to be like, what the heck is x? Because I never declared it. So it's going to give an error. Instead of the app crashing and burning, it's just going to print out on the screen, an exception occurred. And I'm telling it to do that with this except statement. So in this particular case here, so the let me go down to the except portion here. So all this stuff here is basically what I was just talking about, and you can read through it in the notes there. So right here, wrap it up, we have the except portion. So if the above things were not true and there was no match in that iteration between what's in the vendor's text and what's in the post title or whatever, run the section and then go do the iteration part of it. So the except part of this try except is where you actually handle the error. Now the exception section, let me go back over here again. So if you look here under the Python section of the documentation for errors and exceptions, you'll see there is a variety of different syntax errors that would happen. And these ones here where it says exceptions, these are some of the types that you would see. Zero division error, name error, type error, right? Those sort of things. But then there's also one called exceptions. okay, by itself, which is right here. So accept exception as inst. And this is very similar to our for loop when we said for brand or for posts. Very similar to that, where we want to store the exception in this value, and then we can print that value. Say print inst. In our case, what we're doing is we're going ahead and saying accept exception as E. So we just said E instead of inst, or you can put anything you want there. Whatever that is, then we're saying print E, print or whatever the value is. So if there is an exception, if there is an error that occurs, I want you to print it. I want you to first store it in E, and then I want you to print it. Okay? So if we go back to my notes here, you'll note here, it says here, exceptions are part of what they call a subclass. So let's say here, the exception one is the base class. So let's see, where is it at? Here it is. Base exception is the common base class of all exceptions. One of its subclasses, exception, which is the one we're using, is the base class of all the non-fatal exceptions. Because if it is something that's fatal, obviously we're going to expect the application to crash and not cause undue problems or open up for DDoS or what have you. So we're saying basically things that are not fatal, but things that are syntax error type stuff, that we want to go ahead and hold those. So in this case here, exceptions which are not subclasses of exception are not typically handled because they are used to indicate that the program should terminate. So we're saying if it's outside of the fatal stuff, if it is outside of the non-fatal, in other words, if it is fatal, then please program, do what you're supposed to do and close the program. In this case, this is just a simple exception that says, hey, I mistyped something, I didn't declare, whatever. That is something that we want to pull out of there. So in our code, we're calling that subclass exception and storing it as that variable E, and then we're going to say print out if there's an error or an exception. So that's essentially the full script. And in here, you can see all the different references that you have. I highly recommend you visit and look at these different documentation. Don't take my word for it again, because I'm not a coder by trade as far as doing it for a living. I just look at the documentation and just verify with that stuff here what I'm telling you. So just verify and validate everything that we talk about with whatever's in the documentation to understand it. If I said something or misspoke something in my text, it wasn't intentional. It was just a mistake, obviously. So validate it here with the different documentation. Look this stuff up and understand exactly what's happening. I'm just kind of giving you a high-level overview of how this particular script would run. So in wrapping this thing up here, the goal, again, is to have a list, kind of like the list I had, of all your different third-party vendors, and yourself included, your name as well, your company, and then go ahead and create this script and run it. I don't know, whenever you can automate it to always run and then report back to you. But I'm just saying, if you're doing it manually, whenever you feel like you need to run it and check on a daily basis, every morning, once a week, whatever, it's up, whatever your cadence is up to you. Run this particular script, and it will tell you output very similar to this. And of course, you can come in here for those that are really Python aficionados and modify it, make it better, make it prettier, fix problems like right here where there's no space, that sort of thing. Whatever you want to do. But you get the base idea of what this script does. This is a good script for you to go ahead and run. I do it all the time for work, where I work, because we have a ton of different vendors that we deal with. And I'm always checking to see, hey, is this vendor, this vendor's in the actual ransom, and we didn't know about it? Did they publicly disclose it? Should we be worried about it? Do we need to bring legal in? That sort of thing. Now, lastly, let's talk about double checking what you see here, because sometimes the ransomware people can't really spell and they're not very good at being verbose in their language, and they may get some things wrong, and they may not say the name of the vendor entirely. So sometimes it could be mistakenly in the list here, but it's actually not a ransomed company. So what I usually do is I go ahead and just grab one of them. I'll just grab this one here. And what I usually do is go here to RansomDB, and then I just paste it in here and see if it's actually in there. CAPTCHA error. Okay. Didn't know there was a CAPTCHA. Didn't see no CAPTCHA. Okay, there we go. So we can see here, indeed, it is Windermuller, and it was with Lorenz. So that is true. So now let's look up Apple. And we can see here, applexus.com, Apple Ridge Farm, right? So we can see it's not Apple, the Apple that we think, right? The Apple Inc. or whatever their name is for that. We can now verify this. Now, those that are better at Python than me can modify the script to specifically look for just that word, just, apple.inc or what have you. That's fine. I'm just saying, based on this primitive script that I have, this is a way that I double check it to verify, okay, well, this is not really the one I'm looking for. This is not really the vendor I'm looking for. Same thing with Spectrum. In my brain, I'm thinking Spectrum, the telecom. In this case, I don't see Spectrum here. I see Spectrum Associates, but it's not the same thing. I see Full Spectrum. So in this case, I know it's a false positive in this one here. So the only one out of those three that I know is for real is that Windermuller one in this particular case. So make sure you always kind of double check it so that you're not telling the leadership or anything the wrong information, saying, oh, geez, we got this. And then if you want to go a little bit further than that, than this, you can also go, there's my site, which is, let me go to github.com/Shikata and you can always come here and under the Threat Intel cheat sheet, I have a section in here for, I believe it's under breaches. Yeah, breaches and leaks. I think this is the one. Yes, no, this is not the one. So let me go back. I don't even know my own page here. Is it dark web? I think it's dark web. Yes. Right here is a list of different ransomware blogs. So for instance, that Lorenz one that we were talking about, we can say, oh, Lorenz, let me go to the actual dark web ransomware feed for Lorenz and see that actual post, because sometimes they'll put samples and then you can verify if it is the data that you're concerned about. Sometimes they'll put samples up there. Sometimes they'll put the whole dump up there. They'll just leak it because nobody paid. So this is another additional step you can take, is you can go to these different ones that it says from or by this particular ransomware group, then go right to that particular group. Go to Lockbit, go to Lorenz, and all that kind of stuff. Now, I don't always keep this one up to date. However, one person that does is, I think it's under Ransomwatch. I think it's this one. I believe. Yes. So right here, this will tell you which ones are active or not, because sometimes they'll change out onion addresses. And so in this particular case, we can see the Lorenz one here looks like it did check in as being active, and the ones that are in red are the ones that are not active in this case here. So this is another site that you can go check for any up-to-date ransomware feeds in case the ones I have on my site are not active. Another one you can also check is the Deep Dark, shoot, what is it called? Deep Dark CTI? I'm trying to remember now. I'm trying to remember that guy's name. Yeah, right there. Fastfire Deep Dark CTI. This person keeps it really up to date as well, and he has one called Ransomware Group, and it will tell in this site here whether it's online or offline as well. So good stuff there. Yeah. So like, say for instance, that Lorenz one being here somewhere. Lockbit. Look at Lockbit's got a lot of them right there. Lorenz online. So this one here will be the actual onion address for that particular one. So if you do need to verify it yourself and say, yeah, I saw that company here, let me go verify that and see if they have any posted data, so I can actually see the type of data that's being leaked or ransomed, so I can understand if I need to bring legal in or something to that effect. Make sure you check with your legal teams and whoever you need to make sure that you're allowed to do that sort of thing for your job first and foremost. But any threat intel program I know of typically has, the permission to be able to go ahead and search dark web for this sort of stuff as well. So keep those things in mind. And that about wraps it up. I think we explained it pretty decent. Again, it ain't the greatest, sexiest code in the world. It's just basic stuff, but it gives you at least a jumping point to go through to start your own little ransomware check against vendors that you have. So we're going to continue to keep doing some videos like this. I'll probably do some pop series as well as some more Intel Bytes. So keep looking out for some videos. And if you dig the content, go ahead to the website, to the YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I would appreciate that. But until next time, peace out, players.